long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and my co-host, King Newbie Matt Freeman, is down in the cellar with a vampire. How's it going down there, Matt?
It's very dark, and oh god, he's awake. Scott, help.
Bye! This week on the show, we are chatting about Chapter 12, Mark, and Chapter 13, Father Callahan, as we conclude Part 2 of Salem's Lot, The Emperor of Ice Cream. I forgot to say that last time, Matt. Part 2, concluding with these two chapters.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, actually, because we end with our goddess of death, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. Mark and Susan decide to go into the Marsten house to slay a vampire, but forget that they don't have superpowers. Well, okay, one of them doesn't have superpowers. Then, Father Callahan is recruited officially into the Ka-tet. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, that first chapter is sure a roller coaster. Can't wait to hit that one. You really got me. You really got me there.
I can't wait to talk about that.
I mean, I don't know. We're well into the meat of the book at this point, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we've kind of mentioned this already, but the next chapter, chapter 14, is the final chapter of the book. It is 150 pages long, I think more than that actually, but it is the final chapter of the book. And so we're definitely moving into the third act after the end of this thing.
Yeah, makes sense.
So,
all right, and I'm excited.
It's a good time, and we've got a lot to talk about this week. I think a lot of things are happening to our characters, a lot of interesting things about what we think the book is saying about certain things coming out here. I think there's plenty to say.
I agree.
So let's get into it. First, just a quick reminder, our Do the King Thing writing contest is still going on. You have, I think at the time of this, you have another 2 weeks, right? We said the 15th, so 2 weeks, maybe more than that. No, 2 weeks. You have another 2 weeks to submit your entries into our writing contest. We've already gotten a fair amount of entries, but please keep them coming. So excited to get to read all of those. And then, of course, we're going to let our patrons vote on them. If you need to see the rules of that contest, they are in the show notes of this episode and every episode for the past few weeks. So just click right there, read the rules, enter the contest, and win cool prizes.
That's right.
One more announcement. We do have our book club coming this Friday, the 2nd of July. We will be reading Foucault's Pendulum. I'm not done with the book yet, but I think I'm going to have some things to say about it.
Yeah, it is an unusual book.
It is certainly an unusual book. I would say as far away from the type of book Salem's Lot is that you can be.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good description. That should be on the back of the book. As far away from Stephen King's Salem's Lot as a book can be.
There is a name drop of Stephen King in Foucault's Pendulum, though. I don't know if you've gotten to that part.
I haven't gotten to that part.
They just name drop Stephen King.
That's great.
I was shocked. All right, Matt, let's get right into it and talk about Chapter 12, Mark. We begin this week's reading with our first, and we can say at this point, only Mark Petrie chapter. We quickly learn, Matt, that Susan is not dead. Well, yet. It was Mark that snuck up and grabbed her, not Straker. Again, yet.
So, yeah, at this point, I was very mad at you because I thought that you had set me up to think that Susan was going to get grabbed here by Straker. Of course, what you actually did was you pulled a reverse mindfuck where you let me think that Susan would get grabbed here and then relax my guard because she wasn't grabbed here, only for Susan to get grabbed.
Yeah.
In like a minute. So.
And you say it was me doing that to you, but really it was Mr. King that did that to you and did that to everyone who read this book, because I think that's part of what he's doing here is that you set up this thing to make it certainly seem like Susan's fucked. She's been snuck up on by Straker and she's going to die. Even the ending of the last chapter kind of points towards that a little bit. And then you start this chapter and you're like, oh, no, she's fine. She's fine. It was Mark Petrie. They're a team together now. Susan has the hyper competent kid on her team. Nothing bad is going to happen to her. And then Straker sneaks up on them in almost the same way that we thought he was going to do out in the woods.
Yeah.
Like it almost plays out exactly the same way, except inside the house instead of outside. And yeah, that does not end well for Susan.
Yep. It's kind of like when Samuel L. Jackson's amputated arm falls on Ellie Sattler's shoulder, and then she stumbles back into the pipes where the velociraptor is somehow trapped behind the ducts in a way that makes no sense.
Yeah, it's almost exactly like that.
Yeah, it's really similar, and not at all, but it reminds me of it though, because there's a hand on an arm. That's really it, actually.
That's it. Everything else different, but there's a hand on an arm.
Straker could be a velocirapter, though. I'm still leaving that possibility open.
There's still like 200 pages left, man. Anything could happen.
Yeah.
One of the things that really jumps out to me in this opening part of Mark's chapter, though, is like the insane level of competence on display here. Like we see very early, he's got himself a stake, and it's not like a shitty fence board stake like Susan's is. This is like a length of ash sharpened at one end. He says this is good for killing them, and I love how like them is capitalized and italicized. He knows the score here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once again, we are seeing the advantage of Mark being in late childhood, where he has this healthy dose of credulity and terror due to having been a child so recently, perhaps still being one, you could say. But he knows enough about how the world works that he can operate and be effective and actually act on these fears that he has.
Yeah. But I want to circle back around to that, though, because, well, we'll get there. I have a lot to say about his decision to act on those fears.
I think I will agree with what you have to say.
Also, since we've last seen Mark, this is another good thing to point out here. The last time we saw him, a vampire came to his window. He saw the vampire, realized it was a vampire, and said, "Oh no, vampires." Since then, he's figured out on his own that it must be Barlow and Straker who are responsible for this vampire thing. And like not only figured out it was them, but then said, "Okay, I'm here to kill him now." So he like did all this stuff behind the scenes, while our main characters have spent the last 300 pages being like, I think maybe it's vampire. No, well, okay, let's just check. Let's go to the grave. No. All right. Yeah. Behind the scenes, Mark Petrie's like, okay, check them. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like you said, he's incredibly competent here. The only problem, of course, is the overconfidence in thinking that he should go to the Marsten house by himself with an ash stake. Yes, it's proactive. It's admirable in a way, but it's also almost too far in the direction that we wish that our other characters would go, where he hasn't planned this properly.
Yes. And I think we'll have a lot more to say about that as we get to the end of this failed expedition of theirs.
Yes.
I do like in this early part of the chapter, though, comparing Mark's lines here to kind of, what we saw in the Susan section last week. Like, Susan felt absurd, felt ridiculous. She was cracking jokes and making wise about this whole thing. To Mark Petrie, this is serious business. And where everyone else in the book took hundreds of pages before they could come to bring themselves to say the word vampire, Mark Petrie simply sees her with a stake, comes to a conclusion and says, "You came to kill the vampire, didn't you?" And I love the line here. He cut her adult temporizing short impatiently. Her adult temporizing. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is, you really sort of buy that King is like taking the position of like young Stephen King because I don't know, you imagine young Stephen King being the kind of person who thought that adults were kind of ridiculous because he has all of these insights on how ridiculous adults are.
Yeah, and I definitely think Mark Petrie's love of monster movies and magazines and stuff is taken directly from King's childhood. He was big into this stuff as a kid, and so he's definitely borrowing a little bit of himself to craft the character of Mark Petrie.
Yeah, right. What you know.
I do like this particular quote right here. "And you came here alone?" she asked when he had finished. "You believe it and came up here alone?" "Believed it?" He looked at her, honestly puzzled. "Sure, I believed it. I saw it, didn't I?" And this is just so great because, again, I think King is doing something very clever here where he's contrasting that with the statement that everyone else has said throughout the entire book. It's just like simple. Yeah, I saw it. Like Matt needs a day to process a thing he saw and come to accept, yes, I accept that thing I saw was real. And this child is just like, yeah, I believe it. I saw it. Of course I believe it.
Right, because the horror of accepting it is too great for the adults.
Yeah.
Whereas for the child, it's like, yeah, I face this kind of horror all the time. This is what the world is made out of. So I think if there's any sort of moral contained in what is about to happen to Susan, I think it lies in this exact thing, because it lies in her unwillingness to take it seriously, because it's ridiculous, it's embarrassing. You know, what if somebody saw me out here in the woods? What will other people think? This sort of overly self-conscious, overly concerned with how it would look to be believing it mentality.
Sure.
And which is how all of the adults approach it. But I think Susan is the one who is maybe the worst in that direction out of our little doomed Ka-tet, because she almost still doesn't believe it even at this point. She almost doesn't believe it. I think she sort of doesn't believe it even when she goes into the house, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like she's doomed by the rules of literature.
Yeah, I mean, she's at war with herself. I mean, it's so funny because like the word believe has been used with Susan so many times. Like in the one chapter we talked about where the vampire breaks in and Matt like forces him away the first time, the Mike Ryerson vampire, that chapter ends with it saying, and she believed, right? And of course that was fleeting. That was temporary. There's another repeat of that line in this very chapter where like watching this child just accept this stuff, it goes, and then she believed. But then again, she's still in the Marsten house, kind of at war with herself, like where the logical, rational part of her brain and we could call it the child part of her brain are kind of at war, probably up until Straker or Barlow rather sinks his teeth into her. Probably she's like, this can't be actually happening. We don't actually get to see that play out, but you can kind of assume.
It's something I find fun to think about, because we don't really control what we believe.
Sure.
And like it just sort of is a part of who we are. Like we either do believe because we've seen enough, or we don't believe because we haven't seen enough, but we don't decide to believe. And Susan has simply not seen enough to make Susan believe, which in a sense is not even her fault. This is just sort of a character flaw or a fact about her, to put it more neutrally, and it dooms her. So
yeah.
Mark, on the other hand, being a kid, takes very little to make him believe something. He doesn't reflect. He doesn't consider, maybe I'm insane like Matt does.
Yeah. And I just love like how that matter of factness plays out here. Right. Because like, just we're talking about this. Susan asks him, how are we going to do it? Okay. She's like, okay, if I accept that there's a vampire, I accept that you're here to kill it. How are we going to do it? And his response is, just go up there and break in, find him, pound the stake, my stake through his heart, and get out again. He's probably down in the cellar. They like dark places. Did you bring a flashlight? No. Damn it. Neither did I. He shuffled his sneakered feet aimlessly in the leaves for a moment. Like they're talking about a creature of the undead that murders people. And he's just like, what do you mean? Just go do it. Like I've read this hundreds of times in a book.
Yeah.
And this is what gets to kind of the thing I want to spend the most time talking with you about here. Mark Petrie being a child is textually in the book what allows him to so easily accept the existence of these things that us as adults cannot accept no matter what we do. Even if it's right in front of our face, we cannot accept it. It's kind of what his superpower is in some ways. But I think Mark Petrie being a child is also what gets him nearly killed, and indeed what ends up getting Susan killed here as well. He understands what a vampire is. He understands how to kill a vampire. He understands what the threat of a vampire is, but he understands it in the removed way of a kid that reads books about him or watches movies about him or reads comics or plays with action figures. He knows the lore. He knows the steps, but he's a kid that's never, like, I think textually in the book, it says he's never really been in a dangerous situation. He's a middle-class kid who's lived a middle-class life, relatively safe, no real danger. Even when he does get into danger, like his bully, for example, he has this very rational, like thought out theory that he tests and it works. And so he just doesn't have like the healthy dose of rationality in this case that says going to this house by myself to try to kill this vampire is probably not the best plan.
Yeah. I mean, he has a lot of competence for a kid his age, but
yes,
he doesn't have that competence born of experience that says like recruit other people to help you.
Sure.
Like it's not irrational of our other characters to be seeking to get help to deal with this. It's just that they're going way slower than we would like them to.
Sure.
I mean, my favorite thing about the passage you just read is, it goes, "How are we going to do it?" she asked, automatically giving over the leadership of the venture to him.
Yeah.
And, the fact that she gives over the leadership is what leads to disaster here, because what they should have done is Susan, the adult, the mature one with life experience, should have said, "Hey, you're right, Mark, but we need to get out of here. We need to regroup, and then we can come back here with the full posse maybe." But because Mark doesn't even know what resources they have to tap, whereas Susan knows exactly who is on their side, who they can get to help. Mark doesn't. So as you say, like, his ability to take things seriously and kind of immediately take leadership by virtue of just being fully in the moment is actually kind of a double-edged stake. Because because it's leading him to make a different kind of mistake, you could say.
Yeah.
And Susan gets swept along with it.
Sure. I mean, and that is, to go back to your kind of Susan's tragic mistake here, is if she truly believed, like she said twice now that she does believe, she would probably have said, "Let's get out of here." She would probably not have given over leadership of the venture to this kid. Mm-hmm. She would have done exactly what you said. Like, she mentions offhand here that there are some other people that believe what they believe, and that is, it's going to turn out maybe will be one of their only hopes, because we see at the end of this chapter that Petrie catches that, and once again, in a very kind of competent manner, says, "Oh, it must be the writer. Okay, I'll go talk to him tomorrow." So like that's kind of our hope as we leave this chapter. But yeah, I mean, like, they shouldn't be doing this by themselves. They should not be doing this at like 6 p.m. an hour. Like, if you're going to go break into a house and kill a sleeping vampire, I need like 8:30, 9 o'clock, go out, get your coffee, get a bagel, and then go kill a vampire.
Right.
Don't do it within an hour of the sun going down. It's just a bad idea.
Yeah. I like that. Like, this life experience. Don't do anything before you've had your coffee.
Exactly. But I mean, we do see, I will say, like, to give Mark Petrie a little credit here, we do understand the ticking clock going on here, right? Mark Petrie kind of echoes Ben Mears here when he says that things are going fast. Half the town could already be turned, and in another couple nights, there's going to be no one's left. Like, I love this. "I dreamed it," Mark said. His voice was still calm, but his eyes were dark. "I dreamed of them going into houses and calling on phones and begging to be let in. Some people knew, way deep down they knew, but they let them in just the same, because it was easier to do that than to think something so bad might be real." So here's, I mean, this is interesting because, once again, the concept of belief comes up here. We've been talking, so much of this novel is talking about whether or not you believe that these things are real. And here we have people that that on some level do believe it, but denying it is easier than believing it. And so they're going to let the darkness in. Yeah. They're going to let the monsters and the evil in.
It would be too horrible to accept that it's real. And so therefore it must not be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I wonder here, this bit where Mark is saying he dreamed it. Like, you think this is one of those moments where King is low-key acknowledging that his character is getting psychic visions, but not really making a big deal out of it?
I mean, I think so. I think you can play so loose with dreams that it can really be whatever. It can just be like his fear or his innate understanding of people at play here, or it could be, obviously, Mark Petrie is touched in some way. We see things happen to him throughout the course of this chapter that are not normal, that seem to be powered by something. So I would not be surprised if this is just another reflection of that.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as basically King wanting a way of letting us know that, yes, indeed, like, during this night, a whole bunch of more vampires are getting made. Like I wouldn't even be able to guess, like, the number. I guess I don't have a good sense of even how many people are in town off the top of my head, but I feel like we could be at, like, on the order of 50% of the town as vampires, like, after this night ends,
Yeah.
And that number could be off a bit, but, like, I think it's way more than, the 1 or 2% that it was the previous night.
Yeah. And I mean, it hasn't been that many nights since this whole thing started. It's happening, and it's happening fast.
It's very aggressive. Yeah.
So as the two are investigating the outside of the house, Susan feels a fear creep up on her. And I don't really have anything to say about this part here. I loved this writing, and I just wanted to at least mention it on the show. Her heartbeat and respiration were up, yet her skin was cold with the capillary dilating effect of adrenaline, which keeps the blood hiding deep in the body's wells during moments of stress. Her kidneys were tight and heavy. Her eyes seemed preternaturally sharp, taking in every splinter and paint fleck in the side of the house. And all of this had been triggered by no external stimuli at all. No men with guns, no large and snarling dogs, no smell of fire. A deeper watchman than her 5 senses had been wakened after a long season of sleep, and there was no ignoring it.
That's
and
great.
She proceeds to ignore it, by the way.
It's like Susan's amygdala is trying to keep her alive despite the best efforts of her forebrain.
Yeah, I love that. A deeper watchman than her 5 senses had been wakened.
Yeah.
It's great. And I mean, it's interesting because I think that does reflect the hyper awareness that Mark Petrie goes into once he's been captured here in a couple minutes, but he employs it in a way and Susan doesn't. Like, she's got this like hyper awareness, hypersensitivity. Like we see her eyes seem preternaturally sharp. They miss Straker. They completely miss Straker. So
yeah, it is interesting because I wondered here and in the Mark bit, I was like, is this just King's portrayal of the survival instinct kicking in and sort of giving you like adrenaline fueled superpowers, or is it meant to be like a little bit of like the white is with them here and maybe giving them just a little assistance? I could kind of go either way on it, really.
Yeah, I don't think he wants it to be definitive. I think just like the dream that Mark Petrie had, I think either explanation has a logical through point to it. Like either he's just connecting the dots in his head and dreaming about the things he's scared of, or he's getting visions. Either here he's just the way King is writing his adrenaline is very acute and specific, or he's been gifted a little extra oomph. Either one works, I think. Yeah,
it sort of doesn't matter, but it's I also like to touch as they're breaking into the house that the house is just as shitty as ever.
Yeah,
like it's funny because like everybody in the town has been assuming that Straker and or Barlow were renovating the place.
Sure,
and it was silly, and I don't know why exactly. It kind of led me to assume the same. Like they're probably renovating the house. I think the reason is like I sort of saw this plot taking longer, and like I thought that they were going to become a fixture of the town before they started eating people, and it turns out they just like immediately started eating people.
Yeah.
But it hits as kind of a creepy realization to realize that Straker and Barlow have been operating out of this shithole the whole time. Like it's still terrible and smells bad and everything.
Yeah, it makes it really hard not to believe that something supernatural is going on here.
Yeah,
because why would they not build up the house? Like, I mean, and you're right. It makes it seem like they don't actually plan to be here that long, which is, I mean, which is interesting, right? Because at the rate they're converting the town, there's going to be no more food left within a couple days. And so are they just going to move on? And if the answer to that question is yes, then the follow-up question is, why the hell did they open the shop? Like, why was that part of it? Right. And I think it's not for a rational reason. I think it's part of the vampire mystique. Like the idea of being invited in, you can't just show up in town and start killing people. You have to become a fixture of the town first, even if it is just in a storefront kind of way.
I think you're right. I mean, it's just like why the storefront? Why did they buy the Marsten house instead of just either squatting or like I mean, it's I think like you said, they have to be part of the town in a sense. So yeah.
So the two crawl into the house and begin to investigate. They head into the kitchen and they see that open door to the cellar. We know what's down in the cellar because we saw the people that put it there. But as they're gearing up to head down there, look who snuck up on them. And you got to kind of wonder in this moment, Matt, how did he do that? How did he sneak up on him there?
Yeah, because like he drove away and then somehow made his way back on foot silently. Right?
Sure.
So
that has to be this, unless it's possible they missed the sound of the car, but you would think not.
It's also possible that like he flew. Like that's the thing is that there's a lot in here that just makes me increasingly confused about like what Straker is.
Sure.
Because there's a lot that makes him seem more than human, both here and throughout the other chapters.
Yeah, I mean, we had that bit of him seeming stronger than the average bear.
Seems too strong. He seems to have some sort of glamour of his own to sort of like draw people to him. But he doesn't seem to have any like vampire weaknesses, you know?
Yeah, he is a daywalker. We know that for certain.
Absolutely, yeah. And here, like, he seems to take, well, we haven't got there yet, but he seems to take a lot of punishment and not die. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting element. Like Barlow, 100% just a vampire.
Yeah,
Very very classic vampire. But Straker, I'm not quite sure what his deal is.
Yeah, I mean, in the grand vampire tradition, Straker seems to be the pretty standard familiar of the vampire, right? Like the one who gets shit done during the day for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we do have some unanswered questions there.
Yeah,
for sure. So Straker immediately knocks Mark Petrie out, and we cut to him waking up as Straker is carrying him up to the second floor of the house, to the very room where our protagonist Ben Mears saw the hanging body of Hubert Marsten. So there's a real sense of symmetry going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn that Susan has been placed in the cellar to wait the awakening of Barlow. She'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
So we get this line here. What are you going to do to me? Trust you like a spring turkey, young master. Later, after my master holds intercourse with you, you will be set free. So, I mean, I think this is really great, you know, to launch off of our topic at the very end of the episode last week, where we talked about vampires and sex. We talked about it very briefly last week. And of course, Straker here is technically using the old-fashioned meaning of the word, you know, which is like of intercourse, which is just like a social interaction, a conversation between two people.
Right.
But come on. Like, Stephen King's a smart guy. He knew what he was doing with this word usage here.
Yeah, I mean, the connotation is far more intimate than conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
but absolutely. I mean,
It's wonderful.
We've got Susan in the basement with the vampire. We're definitely doing things here. Yeah.
Yes. So as Straker places Mark down inside this room, something happens. As Mark pushed open the door and stepped into the room where Hubert Marsten had committed suicide, something odd seemed to happen in his mind. The fear did not fall away from it, but it seemed to stop acting as a brake on his thoughts, jamming all productive signals. His thoughts began to flicker past with amazing speed, not in words or precisely in images, but in a kind of symbolic shorthand. He felt like a light bulb that has suddenly received a surge of power from no known source.
It's the beam.
Yeah, I mean, like, you kind of asked the question a couple minutes ago. I mean, my take on this, while I am willing to admit that there is a completely rational, mundane take, my take on this was always he's actually been infused with some sort of power in this moment. Whether you want to call it from the white, the beam, whatever. In this moment of danger, Mark's hypercompetence is rewarded, and he's infused with a little bit of additional power that allows him to competence his way out of this.
Yeah. There's also something interesting about the fact that he was able to successfully use the cross, the toy cross, to fend off the vampire, whereas as we know, Susan had a crucifix on her neck.
Yeah, what happened to that?
I mean, it's possible Straker took it from her, but it's also possible that she just forgot about it, you know. But I mean, anyway, in either case, it's like Mark has made contact with something supernatural once before, so maybe that's still helping him.
Sure, makes sense. Regardless of where it comes from, we see here that Mark immediately goes into problem-solving mode, recognizing that he's going to be tied up and remembering the Houdini book he read one time about how to successfully escape from knots. He employs the strategy now, and Stephen King gifts us with about 5 pages of just this truly spectacularly tense writing as Mark Petrie slowly and surely slips out of his bonds. I just we can't go through it all in detail, but I just want to know, what did you think of this section, Matt?
I think it's incredible. I think it might be my favorite part of the book, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It really hammers home to me the fact that so much of the fun of reading, just in general, is in finding your character in an impossible situation and then watching them carefully think their way out of it.
Yeah.
And then that plus the tactile and immersive details of the physicality of it all really nailed the scene in for me. And I thought about it, a lot since reading it this week. I just thought it was absolutely great. Just great writing, great storytelling. I just loved it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm such a sucker for repetition in writing sometimes. It really jazzes me up. And I think that the repeating of he looked at the wall beat as he makes a move and then looks at the wall. And it's almost as if he's watching himself on TV on the wall, giving him the next move that he needs to make. It just really worked on me. I think it's really tense, fantastic writing that almost comes out of nowhere. It's almost as if the book shifts. We see he gets a surge of power from no known source, right? And then the book almost shifts in register a little bit, and we go into this hyper detailed thing that doesn't necessarily fit with the tone of the rest of the novel, but it doesn't matter because it's so effective and intimate and lovely.
Yeah, you become just so absorbed. It's probably the most absorbed that I've been in this book so far.
Yeah, because like it's because I think it's also because the stakes are so clear, right? Like not only do we have the stakes, the time stakes, we know Straker's coming, we know the sun is setting, we know Barlow's going to wake up, but like the way in which King writes the tying of the knots is so specific that we have this very clear image of each and every step he needs to take. So we just have a really great understanding of what's happening here, and that allows us to be able to follow each individual move, from the puffing out your muscles and your breath a little bit to make yourself slightly bigger so the knots will start looser, to the slow slippage of your hand through the first knot, to like, once again, King loves to write about like torturing balls. And so we see the way that Petrie's been hogtied, like it's straining his testicles as well.
Yeah.
It's just really tactile and excellent.
I like the bit toward the beginning, actually, where Straker is like commenting on the fact that he seems so rigid that he's shaking, and it's like, oh, it's just because he's all clenched up. But I don't know. I thought that was a great way of kind of acknowledging that or working it in or something.
Yeah, this leads me to the next thing, and a conversation I wanted to have with you here, because so we see here Mark escapes. He gets out. He grabs a post from the bed to use as a club. Just as Straker comes in, Mark immediately bludgeons this guy over the head twice, presumably to his death. We don't see for certain, but presumably to his death, and then escapes. We don't know if Straker survives this or not, but let's assume he doesn't here until we know for sure. And so my question is, what do you think of Straker? Because I feel like early in the novel, it painted him as a character who's like competent in his own right, really menacing and threatening and making people uncomfortable. In this scene, he plays more of the bumbling sidekick that allows a kid to get one up on him and completely owns him here.
Yeah, I mean, he's super overconfident here. I think he's just used to winning against the humans who he just started to see as sheep, basically, just a flock to be culled, and they're no threat at all. But I don't know. I'm still not sure what to make of him exactly. Like, he could be some kind of middle tier vampire who has some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses, and we just haven't seen the weaknesses. Or, another thought I had is like he could be some kind of like evil demonic priest, whose role is just to help the vampire, and he maybe gets some sort of demonic like boon from that. I don't know. I'm really kind of reaching beyond what's strictly suggested by the text, because it's like, well, okay, the text is pretty clear that he has some powers, but we don't really know what it is exactly. For a while, I was pretty sure that he was some kind of like dark priest, because at this point, like, I think it's pretty clear that he must have been the one that grabbed the Glick boys and made like the dark ritual offering at the cemetery, because Barlow simply wasn't there yet at that time.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I don't think the text has said that definitively, but we can reason he grabbed the boys, made the ritual, Barlow shows up, then converts the second Glick boy. So like the first boy was almost like an incantation to bring about the vampire.
Yeah.
And
it's like literally like some kind of horrible sacrifice. And
sure.
And that boy is just dead.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this is probably cheating on some level, but the audiobook reader didn't use the Transylvanian accent when he read the short line that whoever it is in the cemetery says. And so I was like, well, okay.
Well, then it's not Barlow.
It's not Barlow. And also Barlow clearly wasn't there. So that kind of just leaves Straker. So, and then it's like, okay, well, that's, I don't know. I don't know what any of this really adds up to, other than these are my observations that I'm trying to think my way through.
No, that's fair. And I think we'll kind of see going forward, like if the next day Straker shows up alive and well without any serious damage to his cranium, we're going to have questions.
Yeah.
Whereas if he's actually dead and gone, that maybe gives us some answers, not all of them, but some.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
sure. I do like it's just interesting to me the way King depicts him here, though. Like this line here, Straker's head had dropped on the floor again, but his mangled hand opened and closed on the air with tenebrous vitality, like the jerking of a dog's paws in a dream of cat chasing. Like that word choice to kind of depict him as a dreaming animal and not this incredibly like competent and scary individual. It's just it's really interesting how King has completely ripped this guy of any of his scary quality, and here writhing on the floor we just see him as like a dog dreaming. I have dogs, I've seen them do that. It's adorable. It's not menacing at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point. That really does make you see him as kind of less supernatural.
Yeah. Regardless of whether this guy's gone or not, Mark sprints down the stairs and starts to head to the cellar door to rescue Susan. But right then, it hits 7:02, sunset. "Susan!" he screamed. "Run!" "Mark?" Her voice sounded weak and dazed. I can't see. It's dark." There was a sudden booming noise, like a hollow gunshot, followed by a profound and soulless chuckle. I love that moment.
I know.
In the middle of poor Susan saying her thing, you just know that the booming is the coffin lid opening. And he just immediately starts laughing. Like it's interesting because we don't know how any of this works, but like he's awake immediately and aware immediately and just thrilled. He knows exactly who is upstairs because he calls out to Mark, trying to lead him down. It's really interesting.
It's very fun in an evil way,
Yeah.
And I think we're really getting a sense of Barlow's personality because he likes to kid around. He's he's a vampire who laughs a surprising amount.
Yeah, he definitely enjoys this.
He enjoys the torturing the people and messing with them, and he just has a sadistic streak. It's a soulless chuckle here.
Yeah.
It's funny, kind of that aspect reminds me just a tiny bit of Dandelo, just in the sense that Dandelo was also a sort of a humorous creature.
Yeah. And he was a vampire of his own, right?
Yeah, a sort of vampire. Yeah,
quite the same way,
but yeah, a creature. But in the same way that Barlow also seems to feed not just on blood, but on like a certain kind of emotion. I think at this point.
I did love the moment where Mark shouts to him right before he runs away. He shouts, "I know your name, Barlow," right? Like, I thought that was so interesting because, like, obviously in fiction, names have powers, right? And I think he's like tying into some understanding of vampire lore. He knows, like, I'm naming you. I know who you are. I know what you are. Like, I know your whole game. And hoping that strips him of some of his power over him.
Right. It might give him some tiny shred of protection. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, he successfully avoids the call. He almost heads down into that cellar, but breaks away just in time. So. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the very least, it serves as a pretty effective fuck you to Barlow, I guess.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So Mark heads home. He sees his parents. They're a little bit worried about him for obvious reasons. And he's a little bit worried about them too, right? Like everyone's worried in this town. I love this line here. "There was nothing else to say. The essential and defining characteristic of childhood is not the effortless merging of dream and reality, but only alienation. There are no words for a childhood's dark turns and exhalations. A wise child recognizes it and submits to the necessary consequences. A child who counts the cost is a child no longer."
Man, holy shit. That's a paragraph to ponder, isn't it?
Right?
I mean, crucially, though, I think Mark is still a child, which seems to carry a sort of power as well as being a handicap here. I don't know. I'm really enjoying this kind of exploration of this side of childhood that King is looking into. It's
really wonderful. And I think it's something that he continues to explore throughout his career, especially his early career, but it's really great seeing it kind of immediately set up here. I mean, it also goes some of the distance to kind of, again, to not walk back our earlier comments, but to be a little bit more fair to Mark Petrie. Like this idea of the essential and defining characteristic of childhood is alienation. And so it, in a way, it makes sense that Mark Petrie goes out to do this by himself, because no child believes that an adult will understand this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, Mark never considers, again, going to the police. He never considers going to a priest. He never considers going to his parents. He never considers going to any other person of authority. He looks at the situation, understands the situation, and says, I have to take care of this myself, because no one else will believe me. They won't understand. They won't support me. I am alone in this. I am alienated in this. So that's why he does it, because he has to.
That's a good point. I mean, he's correct, basically, because if a child, if the old English teacher Matt Burke tells somebody that he thinks there's vampires in the town, they're gonna try to figure out if he's crazy, but they might end up listening to him. Whereas if a kid tells you that they think there's vampires in the town, you're just gonna be like, "Oh, you're watching too many movies, Mark."
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that there's a version of the story where things start with Mark Petrie and not with Matt Burke, and that's a completely different story. And it's interesting that that's not how King chose to do it. King kind of chose to set up. We have these adults spending literally 2/3 of the book dealing with the truth of this and dealing with their resistance to believing and kind of arguing amongst each other and trying to recruit more people and going through the rigmarole of convincing people and seeing evidence and getting there. And on the side, you just have this kid who's doing it all on his own. Like, he's going through all that by himself, alienated from everyone. And he's much quicker and much faster on the take. And that was definitely a choice that King made.
Yeah. I mean, when we get around to it, I wonder how much of this sort of thing we're going to be seeing. And I obviously you can't talk about it, but just like, I know that's a story where it's like the kids are the ones who are aware of the evil, and maybe at some point they try to tell the adults and they're probably brushed off, I would imagine. And luckily, at least in that book, the kids, there are multiple kids that can get solidarity from each other. But Mark is like a newcomer here. He doesn't really have that Ka-tet of kid friends to rely upon.
No, he doesn't. I mean, that's another thing that I think King has done intentionally. Like, he removed the two kids that would have been his friend and partner in this. And the only other real kid character we've seen is his bully that he embarrassed. So that's not going anywhere. I mean, obviously I can't say anything about it. I will say that there's a lot going on in this book, and the specific childhood fear exploration of the darkness themes that are part of this book are much more densely explored in that one. For sure.
Cool.
All right. Well, we flash to a little bit later that night. And just in case there were any doubts, Matt, Susan is indeed dead and has been made into a vampire. She visits Mark Petrie and tries to lure him, and of course fails. But let's talk about dead Susan, because Susan's gone now. She's not dead. I mean, she's dead. She's not gone. So we're still going to have possibly more plot beats involving Susan throughout the story. But as a human being, she's gone. And so I joked about this at the very beginning of the novel, that there's it's a Susan character that's in love with the main character. It doesn't bode well for her. And that ended up being 100% true. So what do you think about this?
I mean, I kind of guessed this would happen pretty early, just because, Mark and Ben are making their way south in the prologue, and I didn't figure they would abandon Susan. So as soon as she becomes like bound up with Ben, I'm like, okay, well, something bad's going to happen to her. And it just kind of makes horror genre logic sense that the character who refuses to take the situation seriously is the one who bites it.
Sure.
But sad to see her go. Like, you can't say she deserved it. Like that's certainly not true. It's just like, well, in this sort of horror movie scenario, if you're not going to take it seriously, then
yeah. So I mean, we have the one Susan relationship that we kind of won't see resolved now, theoretically, is the one with her mother, right? They had this very contentious relationship, and it ended on like a break where Susan was planning on moving out. And I guess my question is, like, what we know of Susan's mother is stubbornness, right? That she took one look at Ben, concluded on him. She knows what she believes. She's convinced of it. And I think it's a little bit of that in Susan, right? Is leads to her downfall. Like her stubbornness to refuse to believe this is part of it. I think
it's kind of myopic fixation on what on how she wanted things to go, basically. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
I like that.
So, I mean, we'll see. There's going to be more of Susan. She's not just going to disappear from the book now because she's a vampire and her lover is the main character of the book. So that's ripe for conflict. I mean, it is interesting that she comes to Mark Petrie first, right? She doesn't go right to Ben. She comes to Mark first.
Yeah. I mean, there is the slightest of indications that there is something left of Susan. So maybe she is withholding herself from going to Ben potentially.
Yeah. Let's talk about that because there is this moment where right before Susan leaves, we see then gone, but not before he saw or thought he saw a look of desperate unhappiness on her face. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many bits and pieces. The problem is you come into this with so much vampire lore from other sources that you're just you don't want to over conclude on anything in this because you don't want to bring anything from any other vampire stories you've read. But it seems like this supports this theory that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks that there's a piece of them in there somewhere.
Yeah. And you don't imagine that a vampire would look like desperately unhappy just because they were stymied of getting their blood meal. So it does seem like there's something of our Susan, not something that actually regrets that this is the situation now. But of course, I mean, I think she does have this overwhelming hunger for blood and so forth, just like you would expect. We're gonna have to see, right? I mean, there's gonna be some interaction between her and Ben. There kind of has to be, and I'm interested to see like how much of it is just kind of the evil coming through trying to manipulate Ben versus how much is like the real Susan talking to him.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing I want to see is kind of what that says about their relationship, and we've kind of been picking at their relationship and the holes in it we see, and I think the way it ends one way or the other is going to say a lot about that, and we know either at this point either Susan gets staked or Ben dies is one of the ways this has to end, right? So and we know that Ben doesn't die because we see him at the beginning of the book. So I mean, the way this plays out is going to really say a lot about what the Ben and Susan relationship was, what it was saying, how does this fit into the themes we've been circling around of fear and nostalgia and evil and all this stuff.
Yeah, right. There's so much that's been set up, and the payoff can't just be, oh no, Susan's a vampire now, the end. Like we got to resolve this stuff. So
yeah, and I mean, once again, it's channeling Bram Stoker's Dracula, pretty specific, in which one of the main characters' love interests is turned into a vampire.
We did say we were going to read that, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm telling you, here's my plan. I got a whole plan. We have an overview episode coming up, and I will have finished it by the overview episode. By the time we're talking about this book as a whole, I will get to bring all my very recently reabsorbed Dracula knowledge to it.
Excellent.
That's the plan.
Okay.
All right. So Susan leaves and Mark goes back to sleep because he's a child that can suddenly just go to sleep. I don't know about you. If a vampire was just at my door, like my window, begging me to be let in, I don't think I'd be going right back to sleep right away.
How old is Mark again?
He's got to be like 10, I think, right? 10 or 11.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be going right back to sleep either, but Mark's a special kid.
He is. So as he goes back to sleep, though, he remembers the human Susan telling him that some other men suspected what was happening in the lot. He, as we already said, immediately comes to the conclusion that must be Ben Mears, the writer that was dating Susan. And so he decides to go talk to him tomorrow. That is, if Ben survives the night, because Mark makes the assumption that that's where Susan's going next.
Yeah, right. Seems like probably not, though. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess we're not really sure, actually. Okay.
We are not. Let's head to chapter 13. Father Callahan. Here we go, Matt. This is it. This is the reason we're reading this book.
Uh-huh.
And there's not a lot in here that ties into the reason we're reading this book, but
the scene I sort of figured would have happened way earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't happen here either. So let's talk about Father Callahan, though. This chapter sees us hang out with our old friend the pair for the first time. This is also the only chapter that has his name. Not that he won't. We know a specific scene is coming, but it's not in this chapter. We see here that Father Callahan has been summoned to the hospital by Matt, and we kind of walks in and sees him looking relatively well, worn but not weary. And then King goes on a tangent that he loves to do about the betrayal one feels towards their own body. And I want to read some of this to you, Matt. Once, when in a fine drunken frenzy, Callahan had sat down to write a monograph on the subject for the Catholic Journal. He'd even illustrated it with a fiendish editorial page cartoon, which showed a brain poised on the highest ledge of a skyscraper. The building, labeled the human body, was in flames, which were labeled cancer, although they might have been a dozen others. The cartoon was titled Too Far to Jump. During the next day's enforced bout with sobriety, he had torn the prospective monograph to shreds and burned the cartoon. There was no place in Catholic doctrine for either, unless you wanted to add a helicopter labeled Christ that was dangling a rope ladder. He's such a terrible priest.
It's pretty hilarious. Like he's pretty pragmatic in a lot of ways, and he understands the ways in which his faith doesn't really fit in comfortably with that pragmatism. Which is actually kind of going to be a whole thing when he converses with Matt about this. Yeah,
I mean, he's pragmatic, but he's also not pragmatic in a lot of ways.
He's like a huge sort of romantic also at the same time. Like there's definitely these two sides to him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is so wild that the same man who made this thing that is talking about the ways in which a person feels betrayed by their body and turns against their body and is also a guy who says the church now thinks that evil comes from people. Psh.
Right.
That's stupid. I hate it. It's so wild.
It is really interesting. It's a fun contradiction. And it's interesting that it follows so closely on Susan being turned into a vampire.
Yeah.
Which you could view as a kind of like the body turning against the soul. Because, I mean, if we're going to be dichotomous, if that's a word, about this sort of thing, like the body has been corrupted. The body now needs to feed on blood.
Yeah, that's true.
What does that mean about the mind? I mean, the mind rides in the body, and if the body feels a bloodlust, then the mind feels a bloodlust. But how does that interact with what is left over in the mind?
Sure. Yeah, the soul, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's really hard to separate the two, right? Like if you're super hungry, you get really cranky and crabby and turn into an asshole. So what is that? Is that body or mind? That's like clearly the two are inextricably connected.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, also just the fact that like the priest, like to him, the power of faith and religion and Christ in this case to save you from this intrinsic human truth is so hilarious to me because like that's an afterthought to him, right? I think that kind of is laying the groundwork for his failure of faith later in the thing, because to him the idea that religion can be a balm for this whole thing, that spirituality, that faith, that belief in this regard can help you when you feel like your body is betraying you and you don't know where to turn to, and your body is a burning skyscraper and your mind is caught on the top floor. Like the idea that there's that Jesus guy. I forgot to think about him in my drunken haze. Let me remember it after the fact, right, and then tear it up because he doesn't feel like he buys that. Like he's much more interested in the ways in which the mind is failed by the body than the ways in which your faith can cure you of that central dilemma. Yeah,
right. He, I mean, as we'll see, presumably, his faith indeed does not bear out. So,
well, yeah, because I mean, this is getting to the next conversation they're going to have. But to Callahan, faith is not this loose like thing that you cross your fingers or say a prayer and hope that everything turns out. It's a tangible force that he wants to see enacted, just like evil is a tangible force that he wants to defeat. Like these are things of an older church. I'm getting ahead of myself, but this all fits together, right? It's all
part
idea.
It's all part of the same conversation.
Yeah. So Callahan sees a pile of books that Matt has had delivered from the library, books about vampires, pulp magazines, true crime stories about people who drank blood, all this good stuff. And he kind of, I don't know, makes some conclusions based on that. I found this part really interesting, though. We learned that Matt reached out to Callahan after learning that Ben had not, which is kind of a continuation of a beat we talked about last week, where Ben was like, oh, I forgot to call the priest. Oh, oops.
Yeah.
But we get this little part here. I have been unable to reach him. He left the hospital in the company of my doctor, James Cody. I have also been unable to reach him. I have likewise been unable to reach Susan Norton, Ben's lady friend. She went out early this afternoon, promising her parents she would be in by 5. They are worried. Why didn't anyone call anyone at all ever?
Yeah. They're all just so stressed out and tired that they just have to go to sleep immediately.
Yeah, Ben went home, went to bed, and didn't think to call his friend Matt sitting at the hospital worried about him to say, yes, we did indeed see a vampire. We fought it. It's all real. Gear up.
Yeah, I'm pretty mad at Ben right now.
It's pretty ridiculous. I'm also kind of disappointed by Dr. Cody, who didn't like swing by and check on his patient and be like, oh yeah, by the way, you were right.
Yeah. Right. I don't know. I don't know, man.
They just go to bed. They just go to bed. I think, it's fun to make fun of this, but I do think it's part of what I think you said last week, which is even with the understanding that this is happening and it's true and there's a threat here, they're acting like adults that don't fully. I mean, they're acting a little bit like Susan did, where she goes into the house, even if she says she believes this. Like, they're acting like, okay, yes, there are vampires. Yes, I have to accept that. I've just fought one. But they're not taking it seriously enough.
Yeah, right. I think, yet again, it's sort of that thing where it's like, it's too horrible to fully face. Mm-hmm. And the choice they make is to just not face it.
Yeah.
To just sort of like turn off and it's beyond the scope of anything that I think you can really face rationally. And so their reaction is irrational almost by necessity.
Or perhaps it's better to say they face it on the micro, in that like Ben goes to sleep with his cross in his hand, mm-hmm. right? Like they're willing to believe it and they're going to change their immediate actions based on it, but they're not like circling the wagons and calling the posse in and like making plans for how to actually defeat it. It's just about surviving the night.
Yeah.
And like that is a mind that is still kind of catching up to the truth of what's going on. Like the first thing is you admit that this is real. You process that mentally and figure and deal with your terror. And it's another few mental leaps before you start saying, okay, we actually need a plan to stop this thing from spreading further.
I think the main difference between this book and Bram Stoker's Dracula is that there's no Van Helsing.
No vampire hunter to roll in and be like, all right, here's what we need to do.
There's no hardened, experienced pragmatist. The closest thing we have to Van Helsing is Mark.
The child.
The kid. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of crucial that everyone is still like, it's going to take, if it takes you 7 days to fully process the reality of vampires on average, then the vampires, all they have to do is be done in 4 days and, mm-hmm. and no one can ever really stand up to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of makes even more sense to what Straker said earlier, right? Like the people will always talk. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're successfully living off people's inability and refusal to accept this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fortunately, there's a Mark Petrie here.
Yep.
This is actually just a kind of a side note here. A good place to note that these last 3 chapters we've been talking about have basically run simultaneously alongside each other, right? The events of Ben and Cody and Mrs. Glick, the events of Mark and Susan and Straker and Barlow, and then this bit right here with Matt and Father Callahan are all happening roughly the same time, within hours of each other at least. It's also on Sunday. It's the Lord's Day that the turn is happening, which I think is rather poetic.
Yeah. Everything's been happening all at once. It seems like with the way the exponential spread of vampirism has been going, we can basically expect like maybe 1 or 2 more nights before they've got the whole town.
Yeah.
That's how I feel right now anyway.
I think this just leads to the how it feels like it's going so fast. If you have these 3 long chapters, these 3 events with different characters happening simultaneously instead of happening over the course of several nights, like it makes that speed feel even speedier.
Yeah, it's true.
So Matt begins to talk about vampires, and while Callahan at first does indeed think he's gone insane, the lucidity of Matt kind of wins him over a little bit, and the way he talks about this stuff tends to make him think otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, basically Callahan deals with people who are at some kind of extremity or other so often in his official role as priest that it's just kind of commonplace for him to be talking to somebody who may be having a mental breakdown. And consequently, there's not this long period of like overreacting to that possibility that we've seen from the other characters.
Sure.
He's just kind of like, he just considers it very soberly, no pun intended, and is like, well, he doesn't really fit the normal, box of person having a breakdown, which I have seen many times, and so that by itself gives him some credence.
Yeah, and of course, unbeknownst to Matt, Callahan is like the exact right person to talk about this stuff because he's the guy that's been looking for this exact kind of capital E evil his entire life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love this. I don't think you're crazy. After all, I am in the business of dealing with the supernatural. If I may be allowed a small pun, it is my bread and wine. I love this guy.
Yeah. I love him too. It is funny to me. I think I just like texted you this the other day that like I have a hard time seeing this Callahan as being Per Callahan of Caliban Surges, just because Muller's wait, is it Muller? Yeah. Frank Muller's audiobook voice for Callahan is like somewhat Irish accented and kind of ornery and gruff, whereas this Callahan in this audiobook reader is like smooth and confident and kind of deep voiced. And it just Callahan has obviously gone through a lot more shit by the time he makes it to the Kala, so you can just sort of buy that he's just like older but I don't know, I have a hard time seeing them as the same person in my mind, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, as I've always said, jumping around the multiverse really brings out the Irish accent in anyone's voice, so I think that just makes perfect sense.
I've heard that as well. Yeah.
But as a way of suggesting that Matt is not crazy, Callahan shares a supernatural story of his own, one that he truly believes, of an incubus encounter with a young woman. I particularly like this part of it. "And you believe that?" Matt asked. "Oh, yes, and I suspect most people would. The ordinary fellow isn't half so leery of the supernatural as the fiction writer likes to make out. Most writers who deal in that particular subject, as a matter of fact, are more hard-headed about spirits and demons and bogies than your ordinary man on the street. Lovecraft was an atheist, Edgar Allan Poe was sort of a half-assed transcendentalist, and Hawthorne was only conventionally religious."
That's
Steven's being a little cheeky here.
It is pretty funny, yeah. He's being funny, and it's also funny, I think, that like most people who read giant, thick books are also, in a sense, abnormal and less likely to seriously believe in incubi. Like it seemed like most of our answers to the discussion questions were from people basically saying that, like, yeah, I'm basically a skeptical person with, plus or minus.
Yeah.
But I really do think it's true that most people, and I think most Americans, are fairly open-minded to a surprisingly wide range of supernatural possibilities.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think this is funny because, like, the ordinary fellow isn't half so leery of the supernatural as the fiction writers like to make out. He just spent half a book having his characters be super leery, so he's literally talking about himself here. But true. Yeah, no, I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you about this is, do you think this is something that has changed one way or the other in the 40-some years since this book came out? So do you think people in 1975 were more likely to buy into the supernatural than people in 2021?
Maybe a bit, but I think it might have shifted in terms of which things. Like, we definitely have a lot more people who believe in Bigfoot and UFO abductions.
Really? Than
we did back in 1970s. I think we have less people who believe in vampires and incubi, perhaps.
Interesting. I didn't know we had that. Like, I know those Pentagon papers on UFOs just came out, so I'm sure that, like, the believing in UFOs is at an all-time high right now. even though those were totally inconclusive.
I mean, you just have to look at like the flat Earth phenomenon, or
yeah, that's true.
You know, just I don't actually suggest this, but just like go looking for YouTube videos about Bigfoot and.
That's true.
It's a bunch of people. It's not a small group of people.
That is true. I mean, flat earther is kind of, I mean, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to supernatural stuff. Like it requires an abandonment of logical, rational thought.
Well, what it is just exists in a world of people who are not using the same set of facts that we just take for granted as being basic. As which, I mean, I guess there's no way that this doesn't sound arrogant, but like when you read like a million big giant books, like for fun, you kind of end up with a set of presuppositions and background knowledge that you have in common with everyone else who also reads giant thick books for fun. Mm-hmm. And then the group of people who don't do that, they don't have that information, and then you forget that they don't have that information because you just assume that everyone knows what you know. It's a fairly common thing that I do is I just assume that everyone knows what I know, and it takes me a minute to realize that I've said something that no one understands often.
Yes, everyone has read all the books and watched all the movies that I have.
Yeah,
and no more.
Yeah, right. Just like when I quote The Simpsons at you, and you know, forgetting that you don't have the whole thing memorized.
No, I know what you mean, and I think you're right. I mean, I find this really fascinating because I do think King believes this as well. Like, I don't think this is just him like having a character say it. I think it's something he believes, like that. And I do think it's true. I do wonder, like, we've just had, I guess the thing is, I think it's really easy for people to buy into something supernatural as long as it doesn't have to result in any change of behavior. Like, I think if you told someone the story of this incubi and this young woman, a lot of people would say, oh yeah, I believe that happened. Mm-hmm. But like, if you told someone your neighbor's an incubus and you need to do something about it, I think people would draw a different line there.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right about that. I think that like little B versus big B believe. It's like there's a lot of people who probably believe that you know, Bigfoot is real, and but then if you were like, I heard a noise in the woods last night, it's Bigfoot, like they'd probably be like, okay, you're just crazy, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
can't believe that many people believe Bigfoot's real. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do.
Anyway, despite thinking that Matt is not crazy and possibly just 100% correct about vampires being in Salem's Lot, Callahan is a little bit leery to help, because if he does so, he will do it as an agent of the Holy Catholic Church, which I think ties nicely into our conversation about authority that we talked about last week, right? We can't involve the cops because the legal authority can't take this. The Holy Catholic Church is like, in the world of vampires, like the vampire cops, right? Uh-huh. they're like the evil cops, and we can't really involve them too. Even if we involve Father Callahan, he's hesitant to bring the whole power of his church into this whole thing. He needs to be able to feel like he can act alone. And the reason for that is because he actually hates his church. I think this is really, like, at least what his church has become. Like, the entire concept, it seems like Callahan is the type of priest that the entire concept of Vatican II is a thing that he can't stand, right? Uh-huh. Like, he looks at where the church stands right now, and the church thinks that the trappings and things are symbolic rather than practical, that handing out holy water and hosts to someone who's afraid of vampires is fine for the young priests because they just represent something. They aren't something to themselves. They aren't something powerful. And Callahan completely disagrees with that. He says the church is more than a bundle of ideals, as these younger fellows seem to believe. It's more than a spiritual Boy Scout troop. The church is a force, and one does not set a force in motion lightly. This is really interesting, and I kind of want to get your take on this belief.
Yeah, it ties into what we were saying. I'm reminded, so I think this is very relevant. Like, I'm reminded of how when I was a kid, it felt like enormously important that Catholic doctrine actually said that the priest was actually turning the bread and wine into flesh and blood that he's standing up in front of everybody and he's doing a work of holy magic, something that absolutely happens nowhere else in any context that I was aware of. And it's true this sort of thing is sort of downplayed often to like smooth over things for public consumption, but there's big chunks of religious doctrine that basically say the church is ultra powerful white magic, and priests are magicians of that power. And that struck me as incredibly big and not, I was going to say cool, but cool feels like an unserious word. Like it just felt like the magnitude of this knowledge was incredibly like, it's the sort of thing where you're like, should I like become a priest? Like this seems like the most important thing anyone could possibly know about if there's like actual holy magic happening here. And so that's my referent when Callahan talks about like the church as a force and the power of the Catholic Church to fight evil and all this. That like it reminds me of being a kid and really having a visceral sense of that as being, that was very relevant to me. Like, man, I super paid attention whenever the priest was doing the communion ceremony, because I was like, he's gonna do the magic now,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there's still like even modern Catholicism and modern religion, there's still some of that. Like, yeah, Catholics believe in transcendentalism, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. Or transubstantiation. That's the word I'm thinking of. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just remembered it as I said it. Transubstantiation is like a big thing that separates Roman Catholicism, at least, from a lot of the other Christian religions. And I mean, like Vatican II, I believe was in the mid 60s. So we're only about a decade removed from Vatican II at this point, which was like the huge modernization of the church. Right. And I think Callahan never says this directly, but that feels like what he's talking about. He's talking about taking the church and moving it into the modern era in a way that it's less about this mystical force and more about, expanding church into the cultures which it exists around, and like it's not that like I believe the Roman Catholic Church still like sanctifies exorcisms in some ways. Like it hasn't completely changed, but like it's part of this whole modernization that Callahan seems completely against. That he doesn't have time of day for any of this. Helping people live their lives, like helping people through the troubles of their times, the mundane evils and the mundane problems that we all suffer from. No, I don't want anything to do with that. I want to fight demons. That's what I want to do. I want to use the holy power, the force of the church to fight demons. And I mean, in the world we live in, that's not very practical. And in this world, maybe it's a little bit more practical.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you can view Vatican II as like making the church a bit more human.
Yes.
At the expense of making it a little bit less divine. And that might be all well and good unless you happen to live in a world where vampires are real.
Sure.
If you live in a world where vampires are real, then you probably want it to be pretty divine and not sacrifice any of that power. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that King's message here is Vatican II was bad, though. Like, I don't think like King, historically has had very, very serious problems with organized religion, with Catholicism in particular. I don't think his creation of Father Callahan here is meant to be one that like, this is an example of good priest and good church stuff. I think it's the opposite of that. But I mean, you're not wrong in that a church of force is one that they kind of need here.
Right. I mean, I agree, and it's interesting because we sort of know how this turns out, and it's it's like it seems like maybe I don't know. I don't want to get like way ahead of us, but like maybe this is a God helps those who help themselves sort of thing, where like Callahan is expecting this, this great force of the church to just swoop in and be this divine power that just wipes out the vampire, and it's like it's not quite exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean. Donald. It's very interesting because we have this part here. What do you want me to do? Matt told him. Callahan thought it over and said, "You realize it flies in the face of everything I just told you. On the contrary, I think it's your chance to put your church your church to the test. Which, I mean, if you know anything about God, especially the kind of Old Testament-y Catholic God that Father Callahan seems to want there to be, like, that guy doesn't love to be tested. He wants your faith to be, he doesn't want you to have to test your faith. He wants, it's the exact opposite of that. He wants you to have faith despite the existence of, like, seeable evils, and he wants you to just believe for the sake of believing. And that God does not respond well to tests.
Right. Because everyone who's successfully used the cross against the vampire so far in this book has not been testing anything. They've felt sort of an earnest sense that they needed this protection and they were invoking it. And if Callahan approaches it with the sense of, all right, well, give it a shot, then you gotta assume something's gonna go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I love this so much because, like, any other way we were reading this book, if, like, I was leading you through this book, like, I would have to play coy with all this stuff. But because we're coming at it from this angle of reading The Dark Tower first and knowing how at least this portion of the novel ends, we get to really discuss this stuff going into it, knowing what's going to happen. And I do think King is laying the groundwork here for this to go real bad for Callahan very, very well. Like, his dismissal of the church's role in the everyday life of people, his need to test his theory, his need to just, like, to misunderstand the role of a priest at all. Like, I go back to that monologue he had at the beginning of the book where he's just like, oh yeah, just like a woman who, like, beats her child. Oh, so boring.
Yeah.
It's like, that's people. That's the suffering, the everyday suffering of people. Well, and your job as a priest is to help your parishioners.
And that's the stuff that Barlow loves. Like, Barlow loves that small town mundane evil. Like, he eats it up. Like, that's why he's here. And it's like Barlow's speech is basically saying, like, there is no difference between the mundane evil and the vampire. The vampire is born of that and comes from that and loves that and feeds on that. And the two things are linked, and there's a cycle. There's no difference between the supernatural darkness and the everyday darkness of a woman who hits her baby in the face.
And in fact, Barlow is listening to them and solving their problem in a certain way, right? Like, Barlow sees the humpbacked dump runner who's miserable and has this unrequited love, and instead of, like, helping him deal with the incredibly disgusting issue he has, which is being in love with a high school girl, he just grants it, right? Here's a woman who is suffering from depression and is taking out her frustration with her life on her child. Like, the priest isn't helping her with that, but here comes Barlow to take the issue away from her. Here, I'll take the kid. I'll kill the kid. I'll turn the kid undead. Not a problem for you anymore. Boom. So yeah, I mean, like, you're absolutely right that these are issues where God, in the form of the priest, is failing these people and is allowing these mundane evils to flourish, which coalesce into vampiric evil, capital E evil.
Because you could then say, like, the way that you fight supernatural evil is through mundane acts of goodness, just prosaic daily acts of light accumulate to build into a supernatural level of goodness and light. And but Callahan, he's just kind of going through the motions. He's drinking too much because his heart isn't in it and he doesn't like doing it. And so he's not a good priest, like you said.
No. Yep. Totally. I love it so much.
Yep.
I also find, like, Callahan says he's going to help out, but he gives one condition. And I find this a really interesting choice that Stephen King makes here, because what Callahan says is, all right, I'll help you, but we got to do one thing first. I want you to gather the Ka-tet. All of us come together, and we're going to go down to that store tomorrow, and we're going to go in there, and we're going to tell Straker everything you just told me. We're going to tell him we think his boss is a vampire. He's working for him, all this stuff. And then we're going to observe his reaction and then at least we'll give him the opportunity to laugh us in the face, is what he says. And this is an interesting choice because we kind of know that this is already like not going to happen, right? Like Susan's dead. Straker is possibly lying on the floor dying at this very moment. We don't know for sure. So we have this little bit where we know that this stipulation is not going to play out for any of our characters, because they're going to wake up in the next morning and the world is going to be different, and they're going to find themselves in a much more serious situation than they think. So why do you think this was included?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is it shows Matt and Callahan really aren't taking this seriously still. Things are well and truly out of hand. Ben knows it now. Mark knows it now. Susan definitely knows it now. But for these guys, they're like another full 12 hours behind the learning curve. And like the fact that they're still having this conversation about going to have a little sit down with Straker just shows how, they're still not fully taking it seriously. I don't know. Did you have a better thought there?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's I'm linking this back to Susan, who's saying she believes, but climbing into the Marsten house, like still not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Here's Callahan saying he believes Matt, but still like just going to walk down to the store and tell our enemy that we know him. And like, you're still not really buying it.
Yeah. Right. It's, I mean, we sort of tangentially talked about this idea of like, if I tell you there's a snake in this box, you're not going to be like, all right, I'm going to stick my hand in there and flap it around. And then if it bites me, I'll believe you. It's like, no, like, why wouldn't you believe me? I'm telling you, I put it in the
box. I'm going to open the box and say, hello, Mr. Snake. I know you're a snake.
Yeah.
Just give it an opportunity to bite you.
Yeah. I think maybe you could say another part of it is like, it's so intolerable to be dealing with something that's like this horrifically like unknowable and impossible that they want to contain it. They want to rationalize it. They want to, they want to try to shine a light on it, which means like go have a conversation. And it's like, no. That's not going to work. Like Straker wouldn't even let this happen, even if he wasn't lying on the floor upstairs.
I think one of the things that Matt says, I don't remember exactly what it is, a couple chapters ago, really ties into this, which is like as he's trying to explain this to both Susan and Matt, he says, I'm looking for the rational explanation everywhere. I still want it. I still want it to be there. And so like, even if they're at a point where they believe this is happening, they're still just begging for another explanation to come. And so talking to Straker feels like that, feels like, well, let's just go talk to the guy. And if he like laughs and like totally throws us off, it's like, oh, thank God. Like they want to be told they're being ridiculous. And so going to talk to the source and allowing the source to laugh at them, like allows them to believe that it's still not real in some way.
Right. Yeah. I like that.
So Callahan heads home and we get this moment, but walking back to St. Andrews, he did not feel frightened at all. He felt exhilarated, renewed. For the first time in years, he was sober and did not crave a drink. So good. There's vampires taking over the town, and Father Callahan's feeling pretty good about it.
Yeah. Ben is also not necessarily drinking right now, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good for them. I'm glad that this vampire attack
cured you of your alcoholism.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we talked about this at the beginning of the book, or at least at some point in the book, but I do think it's interesting to see the alcoholism with Father Callahan seems to be less about the alcohol and more about a general sense of malaise and dissatisfaction with his life, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Father Callahan of the future is just like totally upfront and honest about the fact that it was just the booze.
Yeah.
It was always just the booze. And this really does strike me as a person not in recovery versus a person in recovery, right? Like where King is writing about alcoholism from the perspective of a person who hasn't come to terms with their own issues with it yet. And then we see him return to this character with a much greater understanding of that. And it's reflected in how they view the idea of wanting to drink.
Yeah, I like that.
Like, I mean, almost textually here, like that for the first time in years, he was sober and did not crave a drink. That is King saying his alcoholism was tied to his dissatisfaction in the church. And so the second he gets a solution to one, the other goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not quite how it works.
Mhm.
And King will understand that in a few years and write about it. Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you're basically right. I think an incredibly life disrupting event could possibly cause you to maybe not feel like you need a drink right now, but not in a durable way.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do quite like how this ends, though. He's kind of walking home. He's feeling exhilarated, and then he hears a line from a poem: "The night the kudzu get your fields, you sleep like the dead." Who wrote that? Dickie? So he repeats that in his head. This is actually a poem by Dickie about war. And in this moment, we see the exultation had faded away like a bad echo of pride. Terror struck him around the heart like a blow. Not terror for his life or his honor or that his housekeeper might find out about his drinking. It was a terror he had never dreamed of, not even in the tortured days of his adolescence. The terror he felt was for his immortal soul.
Love it.
Oh, shit. If vampires are real, it's all real. Fuck.
Yep.
I'm a terrible sinner.
Yep.
Fuck.
It's all real, and maybe I'm not up to the task of being the divine agent of God like I said I was going to be. Mm-hmm. Maybe that was all a bunch of bullshit that I said earlier to Matt, and false confidence which disappears in the dark of night.
Oh, it's so good. It happens so fast too. Like it's just this one quote from this Dickie poem, and then suddenly, oh shit, shit.
The Dickie poem is very interesting because if you set aside interpretation and you just kind of think about how it makes you feel, mm-hmm. It makes you feel like something is creeping in and strangling everything around you, which the line, "The night the kudzu gets your fields, you sleep like the dead," like the kudzu in the poem is sort of, I mean, my sort of visual image of it, at least, is like the kudzu is creeping in when you're not paying attention, and it's choking off everything, and it's you're having to wade through it, and that's kind of what's happening to the town right now. It's not the vampires or the kudzu, basically.
Yeah, as the tendrils crawl over the fields, the night the kudzu has your pasture, you sleep like the dead.
Yeah.
It's a perfect, wonderful image that they get you when you're not paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
That is exactly what he's exalted and happy and like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Oh fuck.
Yep, it's great.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a great way to end the chapter. It's a great way to end part 2 as we move into the third and final part in the 14th and final chapter of this wonderful book. But that is going to do it for us this week with the reading.
All right. Sounds good.
Let's move directly into our discussion question of the week. Matt, last week we asked people what is their favorite piece of esoteric vampire lore and why?
Well, Emperor Fry the Solid says, "My favorite esoteric vampire lore is counting and some of the protections that have come from that. The story goes that vampires are obsessive about counting any sufficiently large number of things in their way. So some classic protectives include throwing seeds around, putting sand across your door, or putting a sieve outside an entrance. Counting the seeds, grains, or holes takes them all night, and they can't bite you. Part of why I like this whole concept of the vampire/zombie dichotomy, where zombies are bodies without a mind, and vampires are minds without a body. Vampires can't be stopped by doors, windows, or swords, but smells, faith, and puzzles will get them every time. Zombies could give a necrotic rat's ass about holy water or poppy seeds, so just dig a nice big hole, and you'll be fine." I love that. I was so glad I asked this because I thought this was going to be a joke answer when I started reading it. Because this is a count, Sesame Street count reference.
The count?
Yeah, the count. No, apparently this is a real piece of vampire lore. Is they have to count things. That's hilarious.
Yeah, and for the first time, I'm realizing that perhaps the character of the count was taken from that central piece of vampire lore, and not just it's funny to have a person named the Count who counts.
Yeah, you're almost certainly right. But I that never occurred to me either. But I feel like I have heard this, but like I've totally forgot about it. So thanks, Emperor Fry the Solid.
Yeah, we actually have Eric T, who gives a very similar answer here. They say, one of the things I remember that was cool about old vampire lore was that if one throws out a bag of rice or pebbles, they will stop to count them, leaving one time to flee. It was suggested to leave a pile of rice, grain, etc. whenever a suspected vampire had been buried. If there's enough to count that it takes all night, they won't ever get to pose a danger and would have to start over the next night. He also mentions that vampires cannot cross water under their own power, which is another little bit of vampire lore. I believe I heard at one point the belief was that water, life of the earth, flows ley lines that keeps the creatures of evil from being able to navigate them. See the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow, who purposely stops the chase if the quarry reaches the bridge, and the Nazgul, who rears up in the docks, and the hobbits escape via Brandywine Ferry. Water is kind of seen in a lot of ways as life, and therefore stops things of death.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, the vampires in Blind Sight wouldn't be held up at all by
Jesus
rice, because they were just counted instantly upon glancing it.
You're so cool, Matt. You're so cool.
I love Blind Sight.
I know.
All right, next answer from Shortstop 88. I'm not sure if this counts as esoteric, but I really loved how wolves often got along well with vampires, while dogs and cats did not. I saw this in the Darren Shan series, The Vampire's Apprentice, when I read the books in middle school. Supposedly they got along because they were closely related genetically to each other. This connection to wolves endeared me to vampires a bit more, since as a child I was scared of them the most of any monster, because wolves are my favorite animal. Wolves are so much my favorite animal that this lore felt confusing, because I read a nonfiction book about wolves back in second grade, so I knew that wolves and domestic dogs were very close on their branch of the animal kingdom, with both being part of the Canidae family. I didn't hold too closely to this problem in the world building, because honestly, everybody deserves to have a doggo by their side, even if they're a blood-sucking leech in society or a vampire. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, even in this book, Barlow mentions liking wolves and bats and rats and predators and creatures of the night.
But not doggos. Not doggos.
Not dogs, even though they're basically wolves genetically. But yes, they have been domesticated and brought into the fold of the light, of the white, if you will.
Yes. Vampire would never do anything to Oi.
That's right.
Zoe would be on the good side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because Oi is a dog.
I mean, basically.
Yeah.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says the placement of the fangs is an interesting choice. Front teeth like Nosferatu, incisors like True Blood and the Lost Boys, canines like Buffy and Fright Night. Canines have always made the most sense to me, as the name belies the predatory aspect. Do they have perfectly sculpted teeth and fangs, or do they have a terrifyingly wide mouth full of rows of sharp teeth and fangs like a shark? Now I'm scaring myself. I've also always enjoyed the unearthly beauty of many vampires, but are they really that gorgeous, or is their beauty false, a glamour masking the hideous, true bat-like faces of the vampire?
Yeah, that is fun. It's fun how I guess it doesn't matter. It's inhuman and scary regardless. But I guess I don't know if I have a favorite. Do you have a favorite vampire tooth configuration? I guess I like the canines the most.
I think the canines make the most sense. Yeah. Do you like the canines that are always there, or the canines that like appear? Because that's a lot of different choices, right? Too, where like they can make them get bigger, like it allows them to hide amongst us, and then they like in Buffy, the vampires have like a human face and like a vamp face, where now it's my true face. Now I'm going to eat you.
Yeah,
it's spooky.
I'm thinking about like the way the Anne Rice, particularly the Interview with the Vampire movie, which I think is just kind of a standout movie, where it's like their teeth actually are just sort of more prominent and creepy if you pay attention to them, but it's subtle enough that even though it's always there, you don't necessarily notice it. So they could totally get the drop on you, or lure you in, and you would notice that their teeth were excessively big and sharp until it was too late. I think that's the way I like it. That's the way I like my vampires.
So not like a clear demarcation, but just like a general,
just a bit in the inhuman direction that you could overlook until they're leering toward you with their teeth exposed.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Am I reading this one? Sorry.
Yeah.
Mina Jen says, mine is something that is sometimes hinted at in Dracula, but I rarely see in media. Is that when the vampire is slain, there is a brief moment where the human within can be seen and smiles at the time of final death, because their soul has finally been freed and is at true peace.
Aww.
Even in the case of the fiercest, evilest, blood-sucking fiend, even if they were also the worst in pre-vampire life, the purity of humanity can be seen.
Yeah, I like that. I think that goes into the idea that like the soul is literally trapped inside the body of of the undead, and therefore killing the undead is almost the way of saving the soul. Like you free the soul, you release the soul. And perhaps in Salem's Lot, that's what we're seeing here. We don't know for sure, but maybe that's where that little bit of Susan comes from in that window scene.
I like that. Yeah, fun.
All right, we have ALH84001 who says, I don't know if it's esoteric, but I've always found it odd, unsettling, gross that vampires can supposedly do the nasty. Well, the male ones at least. They're supposed to be dead, so ostensibly there's no blood flowing down there. If Viagra commercials have taught me nothing else, is that the male erection is a matter of proper blood flow. So are we talking some kind of supernatural rigor mortis, bring new meaning to the act of referring to the dead body as stiff? Keep your True Bloods and your Twilights. At least I can enjoy Count Duckula and Sesame Street without having to puzzle out the logistics of a Muppet boner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 erections.
All right. Well, the podcast is canceled now.
That's it. That's all. We can't go anywhere from there.
We had the phrase Muppet boner, which may be the first time that's ever been said, or
there's no way that's the first time that's ever been said.
You're right. The world is very sick, but
I guess my answer here would be that's why they drink the blood, man, to get that boner.
Yeah,
they
maybe
get that blood in them.
Yeah, that is interesting. It did sort of seem. What context was I thinking? I guess it was some other discussion question where I was considering, or maybe you even asked it this way, like, do they need the blood because they're using the blood, or like, why do they need the blood exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is definitely like they don't have none themselves, so they need to get it from somewhere else, and they get that by eating it.
Yeah,
and then it goes in their body and then gives them boner.
Yeah, there you go. It's so they can get a boner. It's
so
Viagra.
They can get a boner.
It's like rhino horn. All right.
Oh my gosh! Thank you, ALH. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you really get the greatest discussions going over here. All right. Perry Jane says, my favorite is from the Buffyverse, and I hope this isn't spoilery.
It's not. I checked.
Okay. Vampires, while apex predators to humans, are the lowest of the demon low because they're human hybrids. They're not pure demons, so other demons find them to be a lower life form and kind of tacky. Hell is essentially a subterranean font of demons where they were all driven underground, and it takes a hellmouth to allow them to venture above the ground. I also like the dusting of vampires, which exhibits in a number of ways. They turn to actual dust in Buffy, but in other vampire lore, they instantly age to their chronological age. Not so bad if you were made last year, but if you're a centurion vampire, you're dusted. Lastly, I like that if you're a bunny vampire, you adorably suck the juice out of vegetables. and that is part of the ancient vampire lore in Canada, apparently. I love that.
Uh-huh.
And is that true in Buffy?
Have you ever seen Bunnicula?
I've never seen Bunnicula.
Or read Bunnicula?
Nope.
That is, I mean, in Buffy, they all dust, regardless of their age. If you kill one, it turns into dust, which actually was a pretty expensive CG trick.
Makes
that
sense.
They did back in the day. And so there's many scenes in Buffy in which she will dust the vampire, and then they will cut to a shot where the dead vampire is not in the shot, but you hear the noise of vampire dusting, so they don't have to bother with the CG trick because they don't have unlimited monies.
I love TV.
Very, very good trick. I like the dusting thing. It's interesting because like in the Buffy movie that doesn't happen, but then in the TV show they decided to do it because, I mean, I think it answers the question of like, if you got like a vampire hunter running around town killing all these vampires, like, are people going to be weirded out by all these weird corpses showing up? So it just solves the corpse problem.
Sure.
There's none of them. They're just gone.
Yeah. It seems like a fairly logical touch for a show like Buffy that relies on all this happening in the background constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. Complicated 9519 says, my favorite esoteric vampire thing would probably be how dramatic they all are. They're all about drama and clout and enjoy the moonlight on them. I'm not sure why they got to be the center of attention, but I always enjoy it. They're always living in spooky castles and doing over-the-top stuff for no reason. Like, why are you sleeping in a casket? It's for the clout, isn't it? Also, they just love making a scene when something goes wrong. Oh, something very minor inconvenience happens? Guess I'll just turn into smoke or a bat and fuck off for a bit.
Yeah.
Vampires are very dramatic. That's true.
I think Lestat is my favorite example, which is also one of my favorite Tom Cruise performances. Because he's so dramatic. It's just delightful.
We got to do an episode on that movie one day.
Yeah.
I've actually never read a page of Anne Rice, but I love that movie.
I love that movie too. It's kind of a perfect movie, I think.
It is.
Let's totally talk about that.
Okay.
All right. Next, James B says, my favorite piece of vampire lore is a vampire can't enter your home without being invited in. The fact that a vampire just can't walk into your home and murk you at least gives you a fighting chance. Plus, I just watched Vampires versus the Bronx, and that piece of lore came into play in one of my favorite scenes.
That's a fun movie.
Okay.
Just came out last year, I think.
All right.
Fun movie.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Like it's always fun when you have something that's super formidable, but there's like one or two little rules that give you at least a fighting chance. That makes it more fun to think about and less just purely sort of scary.
That's my favorite bit too, actually. I love it. I think it's such an interesting, it makes vampires unique from a lot of the other monsters out there and fits, very nicely into what we were talking about earlier. This idea of you have to invite them in, and this Salem's Lot has taken that and made it wider, as in the whole town had to invite them in, as in like this idea that evil is always there on the periphery, but it needs you to welcome it in. And like we were just talking about, the minor mundane evils of Salem's Lot are what invites in this bigger evil. And it's a nice touch. It allows you to do a lot of fun thematic things with vampires. It's just a fun little rule that they've invented. I'm not sure exactly where that originated. It's so hard to track all this stuff.
It seems like it's probably an old piece of lore, but
yeah.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about this at all, weirdly, but like I watched like 2 episodes of True Blood like a million years ago. And interestingly, also, True Blood is not something that comes up in our discussion questions very often. Wonder why that is. But I was just remembering like a scene that kind of stuck with me for whatever reason. I just thought it was well done, where like the vampire like comes to someone's door, and they open the door, and there's like some kind of scene happening in the house, and the vampire is like the good guy and needs to be able to come in. And so he looks at this little girl who's standing in the living room, and it like snap zooms, and he goes like, "Little girl, invite me in." And she invites him in, and then he just like rushes in and solves the problem. But it's just it's an added little twist that makes the scene even more fun and kind of adds a fun dynamic to things.
And this problem is explored a lot in Buffy and Angel as well, in really interesting ways.
Awesome.
Some like the ways they get around it sometimes are like interesting. Like a hotel is a public place, but like, and there's like things like the second the person that lives in the house dies, it doesn't become their house anymore, so you can go in. And I think there's one where like it says in Latin above the school, like all who seek knowledge are welcome, and that's apparently enough. Like they play fast and loose with it, and really, but I mean, it allows them to have fun with it. It allows like you to do fun writing things with it, which is one of the coolest things about it.
Yeah.
All right, last we have Steve L, who says, my favorite vampire lore is how someone can be bitten by a vampire and even drink of their blood, but not turn into a vampire themselves until they make their first kill. It was perfectly executed in The Lost Boys, which is by far my favorite vampire movie. And as folks will remember from our Wolves of the Calla discussion, it's also one that Matt has not seen.
Still not seen.
Still. It's been like a year.
I'm going to put that on my list. So this is big news, everyone. I've actually started an actual list, which is different because Scott or whoever else would always just mention things, and then I'd be like, yeah, I got to watch that. And then I would completely forget about it for the rest of my life. So now I have a little list of things that I have to watch.
Do you have this list saved on our Google Drive so I can go in there and add things to it?
No. Currently it's just in my phone notes because that's the easiest for me to like quickly pull out, because otherwise I would totally forget. But there's already 7 things on this list, and I started it less than 12 hours ago. So,
but I want to be able to sneak in and add things without you noticing.
Well, you should just make a list for me and then forward it to me.
Here's what we'll do. Everyone email Kingslingers, kingslingerspod@gmail.com. Things Matt should see. There we do.
This actually sounds kind of fun.
kingslingerspod@gmail.com. Things Matt should see. We need like a Twitter hashtag too.
Yeah. Hashtag things Matt should see.
Hashtag things Matt should see. There we go. Do it, and we'll help compile a list, and we'll fix Matt. Yeah. We'll fix him.
I mean, it is weird what blind spots I have. I'll admit it.
Everyone has really interesting blind spots. Like there's like you can be one of the most like well-read / well-watched whatever, and you're always gonna have like just random things that for whatever reason you didn't like. I have some weird ones too.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say like, oh, Matt hasn't seen anything. Like, no, I've seen most of the things everyone's seen. There's just a few things here and there that I haven't. So but it's weird when I find them. Anyway,
for sure. All right. That is it for this week's discussion question. What are we going to ask the folks at home next week, Matt?
The question for next week is, what is your favorite example of a competent child character in fiction and why?
All right, folks, you heard it there, and I know what you're all thinking, and I need you to do me a favor, which is to not spoil any books that are Stephen King related for Matt. I know you have a Stephen King one in your head right now. I know you do. I know you're already typing the email or the post, but please try to keep spoilers for any Stephen King books to a minimum, please. And if you're not doing a Stephen King book, well, spoil away. We don't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah. Fuck every other author.
All right, folks, that is it for us here on Kingslingers this week. Next week, we will begin part 3 and the final chapter of Salem's Lot. Like we said before, chapter 14, the Lot 4, is a long one. It's a long one, and so we are breaking it into 3 pieces. This is where it gets a little complicated, everyone. This includes you, Matt. Next week, we are going to be discussing sections 1 through 18 of chapter 14. So stop after section 18. If you hear the word 19, it should be an easy number to remember. Stop.
Indeed.
Stop.
All right. Did you do that on purpose or?
I did not.
Wow.
It just happened that way.
Excellent.
19's everywhere, man.
That's true. All right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter @kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit r/doof media is a great place to hang out and answer the discussion question if you want.
Yeah. Hashtag things Matt should see.
Yeah.
Was that what it was? I already forgot.
I think so.
If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you can make sure that you never miss a single one of our episodes. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
That's right. And if you want to support Kingslingers or any of the other shows on the Doof Podcast Network, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Thanks this week to new patrons, Doof Dancers, Caroline L. and Barry, and new Doof Trooper, Kelly M. Really appreciate y'all. We appreciate your support. We hope you enjoy the stuff that we have at those tiers.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, the voting for the Do the King Thing contest that will happen next month will only be open to our patrons. So if you want to help participate, if you want to read these great stories before we announce the winners and help decide which one of them wins, that's how you do it. Go to patreon.com/doofmedia and pledge at any one of our available levels, and you will get to vote in that contest.
Awesome.
All right. Of course, though, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast and by leaving us a rating and a review, a 5-star one. It doesn't help us when you leave us lower than that. So don't do it.
Don't bother. Yeah.
This week's Spotlight review comes from Sleeping Cat Lady, who correctly gives us 5 stars and says, can't say enough nice things about this podcast. I first listened to Kingslingers on the recommendation of a fellow member of a Facebook Stephen King group. At the time, I was about 3/4 of the way through the drawing of the 3. After the first episode, I was hooked through the bag, as Eddie Dean would say. I made the rest of my trip along the beam with Scott and Matt. I just finished the final book almost in time to get completely caught up. I'm sad that I didn't start the series a year earlier so I could take part in the awesome discussion questions, but I'm looking forward to The Wing Through the Keyhole and Season 2. I've already read the majority of the books and stories that will be covered, but I'm looking forward to visiting them again with another veteran King reader and a newbie. Keep up the great work, guys. May your days be long upon the earth.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sleeping Cat Lady. That was so very nice of you. And thank you to everyone who has left us rating and reviews, even those of you who didn't leave us 5-star ones.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Less so, but still there.
Yeah. Just a little bit less so.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks Sleeping Cat Lady. That makes me feel very warm in my heart.
Like some sort of sleeping cat.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a cat sleeping on my heart.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. We will be back next week for the first 18 sections of Chapter 14, The Lot. 4, 3, that one. Chapter 14.
Uh-huh.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.